All right, let's dive into one of the most intense and dramatic stories you'll ever encounter. The absolutely tragic fall of King David.
You know, the scholar we're drawing from for this, Dr. Robert Chisholm, he just nails it with his chapter title, Oh, What a Tangled Web We Weave, and his subtitle, Power Poisons the Conscience. It's this chilling idea that no one, not even a king chosen by God, can actually hide their sins.
So to really feel the impact of this story, you've got to understand just how high up David was. I mean, he is at the absolute peak of his power. He's got military victory after military victory, he's built an empire, and he has a promise from God himself that his family will rule forever. For all intents and purposes, the man is untouchable.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How does a guy like that, at the very top of his game, completely fall apart, starting with just a single glance from a rooftop? Let's trace how this whole catastrophe unfolds.
The thing is, even before our story starts, the narrator has been dropping these little breadcrumbs. As David's power grows, we keep getting these, what you could call harem reports, showing him collecting more and more wives. He's starting to act less like the humble shepherd king and more like every other ancient monarch. And that concentration of power is about to expose a really fatal flaw.
And here's the first critical detail. The story kicks off with David not where he's supposed to be. His army is out there laying siege to a city, but David, the legendary warrior, he's chilling back in Jerusalem, enjoying the comforts of the palace. He's idle, and that idleness creates a vacuum that temptation is just about to fill.
So one evening, he's taking a walk on his roof, and he sees a woman bathing. And right here, the storyteller hits pause and gives us this little narrator-to-reader comment. The woman was very beautiful. Now that's not just fluff, it's a huge narrative spotlight. The temptation isn't just a fleeting thought, it's profound.
And this is where the storytelling gets so brilliant. See, up until now, David has been framed as this heroic figure, kind of like a new Joshua. But the last major character in this larger story who famously saw a woman, well, that was Samson. And we all know how that ended. His lust led directly to his downfall. So with that one simple phrase, the narrator is telling us something has changed. The hero David is becoming the tragic David.
So he's seen her, he wants her. The only question now is he going to use his incredible power to just take what he wants? And yeah, the answer comes fast.
Just look at the language here. The word that keeps popping up is sent. David doesn't lift a finger. He just speaks, and his power makes it so. He sends someone to find out who she is, and he's told she's Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his own elite soldiers. Now, that should have been a full stop, but it wasn't. He just sends messengers again, has her brought to him, and sleeps with her. It is such a calculated abuse of his authority.
Then, the narrator drops in another one of those little side comments that changes everything. This is basically the ticking clock of the story. By telling us she was just finishing our menstrual cycle, the narrator makes one thing absolutely certain. If she gets pregnant, there is no way her husband, who is off at war, could be the father. The fuse has been lit.
And, well, you know what happens next. The worst-case scenario, she conceives. And now, after David sent for her, she sends a message back to him. I am pregnant. Suddenly, this isn't a secret sin anymore, it's a real-world problem, and David has to do something fast.
David, ever the brilliant military strategist, comes up with what seems like a simple plan to fix his mess. But he makes one huge mistake. He completely underestimates the character of the man he just betrayed. So, Plan A seems pretty clever, right? Step 1, call Uriah back from the front lines. Step 2, send him home to wash his feet, which is just a nice way of saying go home, relax, sleep with your wife. Step 3, when the baby is born, everyone, including Uriah, will just assume it's his. Problem solved.
But Plan A hits a brick wall, and that wall is Uriah's honor. Instead of going home to his own bed, this incredibly loyal soldier just sleeps at the entrance to the palace with all the other servants. He absolutely refuses to enjoy comfort while his brothers-in-arms are roughing it on the battlefield.
When David asks him what's going on, Uriah's answer is just, wow. It's this powerful, devastating rebuke of the king's own behavior, and Uriah doesn't even know it. He talks about his loyalty to God, to the army, to the mission, all the things David himself has abandoned by staying behind in Jerusalem. Every word out of Uriah's mouth is a judgment on David.
So Plan A is a total bust. David even tries getting Uriah drunk, hoping that'll send him home, but nope.
The man's integrity is unshakable. David's getting desperate now, and his web of sin is about to spiral from deception into something much, much darker.
He goes to plan B, murder. David writes a letter to his general, Joab, with very specific, very brutal instructions. And in a moment of just unbelievable, chilling irony, he gives that sealed letter, Uriah's own death sentence, to Uriah himself to carry to the front lines. The plan is savage. Put Uriah where the fighting is heaviest, and then have all the other soldiers pull back.
And once again, the narrator's word choice is so telling. The phrase David uses in the letter, struck down and die, is the exact same phrase used to describe him as a hero, killing lions and bears and the giant Goliath. But it's also the phrase used to describe murderers and assassins. The language itself is telling us David has crossed a line. He's not the hero anymore. He's acting just like the villains he used to fight.
So Joab gets the letter, and being the pragmatic general he is, he carries out the order. He puts Uriah and his men in a vulnerable position. The enemy attacks, and as the report comes back, a number of David's men are killed, and then, almost like an afterthought, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Mission accomplished, and a few other loyal soldiers died just as collateral damage.
So, that's it. Uriah is dead. The one man who could expose the whole thing is gone. As far as David's concerned, the coast is clear. The cover-up is all but finished. He thinks he's gotten away with it.
When the messenger brings the news, David's reply is just shockingly cold. He tells Joab basically, hey, don't worry about it. These things happen in war. The sword eats one guy today, another guy tomorrow. This is the sound of a man actively crushing his own conscience, pretending this murder was just a random casualty of war.
And now the final steps just fall into place like clockwork. Uriah is dead. Bathsheba has her official mourning period, then David brings her into the palace and marries her. And not long after, she gives birth to a son. To anyone on the outside, it just looks like a noble king taking care of a war widow. The cover-up is perfect.
The tangled web is finally complete. The affair is a secret. The husband is gone. David has the woman he wanted. He has a new son. From any human point of view, he got away with it. A perfect crime. But the story isn't quite over. And then we get the final gut punch sentence of the entire chapter. After all the lies, all the scheming, the murder, the cover-up, after all of that, the narrator simply says, "But the thing David had done displeased the Lord." The cover-up might have worked on every single person in the kingdom, but it didn't work in heaven. And that one sentence hangs in the air, setting the stage for the terrifying consequences that are about to come crashing down on King David and his entire family.